your relationship within UMNO, there are cracks appearing, right? After all, you did resign as Selangor UMNO treasurer way back in April. So that means to me, things are all not that rosy. Otherwise, there will be no resignation.
Wow. Your memory is very good.
I do a lot of research before these breakfast grills, Tengku Zafrul.
Yeah, I guess next time don't call it breakfast grill, call it breakfast torture. But anyway.
I'm Wong Xiaoning, and this is the Breakfast Grille. Malaysia's trade value surged 9.2% to a record 2.9 trillion in 2024, with exports at 1.5 trillion, while imports increased to 1.4 trillion. With that, a trade surplus of 137 billion, the highest ever recorded in the nation's history. However, with the tariff storm brewing and increasing political tensions, will Malaysia continue to see strong performance and reap the benefits of the Madani government policies? Questions we pose to Tengku Datuk Seri Zafrul Aziz, Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry of Malaysia. Welcome back to the show, Tengku Zafrul. Now, I'm going to start with ASEAN because I know the 31st ASEAN Economic Ministers Retreat just concluded. 18 priority economic deliverables, or PEDs, have been endorsed by all member states. How challenging was it to get to the finishing line?
Well, first of all, thank you, Charming. Thank you for having me on this second day of fasting month. But yes, we just came back from this Haru for the AEM or ASEAN Economic Ministers Retreat. In fact, it's our 31st ASEAN Economic Ministers Retreat. All ministers approved the 18 PDs, as you said. When you asked me how difficult it was, I think, to be very fair and very frank, at the level of ministers, it was not as difficult as we thought because the senior officials have done a lot of the work before that. They had a meeting in December in Kuching to thrash out some of those issues. And then after that, they have another one just before the ASEAN Economic Ministers meeting. So we sat down. Most of the issues are resolved. I think the issues that are not resolved are more issues that are timing, to do with scoping, and etc. And we will be looking and monitoring this very closely for the rest of the year until the leaders meet.
So what difference is Malaysia making as chair of ASEAN when it comes to the first thrust of the PEDs? I think one of which is, of course, enhancing trade and investment, right?
Yeah.
Was it always Malaysia's focus to upgrade trade agreements such as the ASEAN Trade and Goods Agreement and also those with China, the Gulf, and India? I think it's because we are facing a world which seems to be enamored by protectionism at the moment, and we're stepping away from globalization, which ASEAN seems to have benefited so much from.
Yeah, I mean, ASEAN is very much an open economy. I mean, if we look at even Malaysia, I mean, you asked me why we are pursuing for this trade and investment agenda. It's partly to do because Malaysia is very much an open economy. You mentioned the number just now. The trade number is 2.9 trillion. And if you look at our GDP of 1.6 trillion, that's a trade to GDP ratio of close to 175%, right? So it shows how open our economy is and how dependent we are on trade. And similarly for other ASEAN nations as well. So you mentioned about strategic trust number one. There are 4 strategic trusts. Of course, strategic trust number 1 is enhancing trade and investment. For completeness sake, the other 3, second one is on creating an inclusive and sustainable pathway. We have strategic trust number 3, which is promoting integration and connectivity of economies, and strategic 4 is to build a digitally resilient ASEAN. So yes, we are pursuing many FTAs. In fact, in the 18 PEDs, they're partly to do with a few FTAs that we want to upgrade, including the ASEAN Trade and Goods Agreement itself, right? So we want to upgrade that. We also want to upgrade the 2 ASEAN FTAs, one with India, one with China, and of course one major one that we are working on, which is not as easy as we initially thought, is a digital economic framework agreement, because that is the first of its kind in the world.
Yes.
Right. So that is, I think, another challenge that to get all ASEAN member states to agree on the details of it. I mean, the principle, of course, everyone agrees because it promotes trade and investment. But the devil is always in the detail. So
I'm going to talk about the DEFA later, but I do want to ask you about this protectionism, and we can see this tariff storm brewing, right?
Yes.
Because tomorrow, US President Donald Trump is going to impose 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and then another 10% on China. Now, he's also threatened reciprocal tariffs on semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, cars. Has ASEAN as a group done a scenario analysis on the likelihood of tariffs being imposed on the bloc? Is that something that keeps you up at night, Tengku Zafrul?
Well, yes, of course. I can't deny the fact that this was discussed, right? Because this is something that everyone's discussing out there. And of course, when we sit down at the ASEAN Economic Ministers Retreat, this is one area where we got consultants in as well to give their views, experts to give their views. But at the end of the day, collectively, ASEAN always work based on consensus.
Yes.
We believe in ASEAN centrality. So what will happen now, what we have agreed on, is to set up a task force comprising of ASEAN member states, bringing some experts, do a more detailed analysis on what can happen or what could happen in this case, and understanding the impact. But more importantly, what are the necessary actions to do today? And if it does happen, what ways can ASEAN mitigate? Because it is different for Malaysia and for Vietnam, for Thailand.
Yes, exactly.
They all have different trade arrangements with other nations, including the US. If you look at, one of the big discussions is countries like Mexico, Canada, they have a huge trade surplus with the United States. But we have one ASEAN neighbor who also have a huge trade surplus.
Which is Vietnam, with $103 billion US dollars,
correct,
right?
correct.
But at the same time, Singapore is on the reverse. They have a very small trade deficit.
Yes,
so how do you manage this where each ASEAN nation has... A member state has their own national agenda and also their own trade policies?
Yes, Vietnam is actually the largest for ASEAN. You are absolutely right. In fact, it's the third in line after Mexico and Canada. Malaysia is a bit further down the line. And you're right, Singapore. But again, you have to understand the nature of each country, like why Singapore is positive. Why Singapore is a country where people use them as a platform to re-export, import. It's like basically a distribution center, if you want to put in layman's terms. So because that population cannot consume that much imports and exports anyway. So it's being used as a hub for trading, right? So so we need to understand each other's concerns, right? At the same time, come to a common understanding about how can we collectively discuss these issues with the US. And the Prime Minister has already stated, and also the Foreign Minister stated, that we are preparing for an ASEAN-US special summit, right? So I think that one platform that can be used to discuss some of the issues that can be issues that may be of concern to both sides.
So will it be at that summit where we will know more about the mitigation strategies, or are there already some in place?
No. Mitigation policy, the ones that's obvious.
Trade agreements.
Trade agreements, yeah. I mean, we talk about improving trades with other countries, including US, to be fair. Engagement is key, right? So we all are preparing for engagement at our own levels, right? I mean, myself, with my counterpart in the US and my counterpart in ASEAN, how do we then do the necessary? Because we need to understand what are the concerns, right? And then address those concerns. And we also have to share our concerns as well. Right?
Okay. So I want to talk about another strategic trust, which is, of course, inclusive and sustainable pathway, right?
Yes, correct.
But some of these initiatives, aren't we in competition? For example, a connective and inclusive ASEAN capital markets.
Yes.
Or even things like an ASEAN framework for integrated semiconductor supply chains.
Yes.
Doesn't competition impede our ability to cooperate? Because we want to be the most vibrant capital market. We want to have the greatest share of FDI when it comes to semiconductor. We want to be the ASEAN hub. How do we cooperate when we want to be number one?
Well, first of all, we all embrace the principle of multilateralism, right? So if you don't believe in the principle of multilateralism,
it's a bit of a mouthful.
Basically, multilateral platforms.
Yes.
Then there's no point having ASEAN. Right? There's no point joining WTO. There's no point joining CPTPP, etc. Right? So of course, the rationale and the reason for doing that is because we believe that we all have our competitive advantage. We all believe that working together is always big, and it's not a zero-sum game.
So there's no pressure on the fact that for 2023, these are old numbers though, that Malaysia ranked fourth in ASEAN behind Singapore, Indonesia and Vietnam for its share of FDI inflows into the region. There's no pressure? I mean, like a rising tide raises all ships?
Yes, if you look at this properly, right? If we look at our investments last year, it went up 15%, 14.9% to 378.5 billion ringgit. Do you think we did it alone? I don't think so. I think it's because we have, first of all, a stable and peaceful region, ASEAN. Secondly, the economies in Singapore, the economies in Vietnam all did well, and they will spill over to Malaysia because when you look at companies building their supply chain, they don't put in one country in ASEAN. So if a company comes and invests in Singapore, is like the likelihood of them building that supply chain with other ASEAN countries is very high, and usually, naturally, Singapore is Malaysia, and that's why we have Johor Singapore Economic Zone, for example. So there are spillover. Of course, there is competition, right? And competition are not necessarily unhealthy. So, competition will drive productivity, will drive efficiency, will drive also improvement in areas where we think should improve and improve the livelihoods of people. So I think it's a balance. There's a trade-off, admittedly, but overall, it is a positive impact to our economy.
Okay, so let's talk about the last trust, which is building a digitally resilient ASEAN. And this is where DEFA comes in, right?
Yes.
Why has it been termed a landmark agreement, and how is it really going to drive social economic growth in ASEAN?
Yeah, well, it's a landmark agreement because it's the first ever agreement of any groupings to look at a digital FTA, completely digital. And of course, we are based on what we have done with the study. It's estimated that the region's digital economy value is about $1 trillion by 2030. Why it's important? I think there are three reasons why it's important. Number one is because it's in line with the theme of inclusivity. Because, what the problem with trade sometimes, right? The people out there are not seeing the spillover. They're saying that trade is good for big companies.
Yeah,
right?
why are things so expensive? Why aren't my wages going up?
Yes, that's one. But first, the trade itself, right? All the multinational, the big mid-tier companies, they are the one that enjoy and leverage.
SMEs don't feel it sometimes.
Yes, because they can't participate in it. And some of it is micro SME even more. So with DEFA, with Digital Economic Framework Agreement, it allows your mom and pop shop or your small SMEs to export using the e-commerce platform. Secondly, I think you're absolutely right. We need to ensure that with this, because at the end of the day, if you look at the number of companies registered in the ASEAN, 97 or some countries, 99% of company registered are micro SMEs and SMEs. So they will then get that positive spillover and increase household income, because we want to see that GDP number goes up. And finally, I think DEFA is very important as well, because if you look at the potential of DEFA itself, it allows many other products to come in, including services, right? So not just goods, trade in goods.
Tengku, let's bring this conversation back to Malaysia. So kudos, I'll say that. Seldom would you get, such high praise from me.
Wow, thank you.
Okay, for achieving record trade
I hope
figures.
This is recorded.
Yes, it is. For 2024 at 2.9 trillion. And I read for 2025, MITI is targeting a 5% increase to 3 trillion. This is where I'm going to pressure you. What reasons do we have to be optimistic, since there's already been a dismal start to exports in January with growth at just 0.3%?
Yeah. Well, first of all, right, this is a forecast. Of course, forecasts can change. We've seen many forecasts change along any timeline. But what's important is that we have to base our forecast on the assumptions on the GDP growth.
Yeah.
So the Central Bank has announced the GDP growth forecast for Malaysia for the year 2024 is between 4.5 to 5.5%. There is a positive correlation, and if you look at correlation coefficient of 1, which is usually the case of minimum correlation coefficient of 1, means that our trade numbers, export plus imports, will be around 5%. Of course, this is assuming no tariff, right?
Which is unlikely to be the case, right?
Which we don't know, right?
Okay.
It's very hard to predict the unpredictable, but at the same time, we need to do various scenario analysis, right? So, scenario analysis then based on what scenario 1, 2, 3 scenarios usually, and then they will have a sensitivity analysis on each scenario and see the impact, right? Of course, we'll also have to do what kind of tariff will that be in what sectors, whether it's just for Malaysia or it's for the whole region. So because, there is, one cannot deny the fact there is direct and indirect impact on tariff, right? Tariff on China or tariff in other countries might have an impact in Malaysia or in the region, because there will be realignment of supply chain, realignment of exports. Exports from China to US might be diverted to Malaysia or to other countries in ASEAN, right? So this, it is a very complex situation but because markets and supply chain and trade and export and imports are all so interlinked today, right? It's so deep.
Which makes me wonder, what then is our downside risk? It sounds like we have more downside risk than upside risk at this moment, right?
At the moment,
because
of course.
if you look at China, they are our main trading partner.
Well, that's have changed. US is our main trading partner.
Yes, but they are like top 3 easily, always consistently.
Always top 3, yeah.
So if there's a tariff,
Sorry, China trade. US our largest export market.
Yeah. If anything happens to China, and they are also seeing a slowdown, and there's readjustment of this supply chain, aren't we inevitably going to be impacted? So what does the scenario analysis tell you, Tengku Zafrul? Does it keep you up at night? Do you want to share with us what is the worst case?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't keep me up at night. I'm so tired every day. But yes, again, I mean, we have to be mindful that this event may happen, and the likelihood of it happening based on market reports is quite high, right? So, like I said, it's very hard to predict when we are not sure what exactly is going to be announced. I mean, we've seen tariff, we've even seen export restrictions, right? So there are many scenarios, but whatever it is, right? One sector that is very important to Malaysia is E&E, right? So, if we talk about, tariff on steel and aluminum, it's only 1% of our export to the US. So it may not pay an impact. If tariff on palm oil is so small,
but it's E&E is 41% of our exports, right?
Correct. So if it's E&E, then it's different. So that's why I'm saying, let's look, there's many areas. And again, E&E, which part of E&E, right? Is it semiconductor? And what level of semiconductor we're talking about? Is it about test and assembly? I don't think the impact will be much because test and assembly doesn't impact us in a way from our understanding, because it's really not as critical or as high end as manufacturing the chip itself.
Yes.
Right. So for Malaysia, we just have to be ready, engage, explain, right? I mean, of course, you mentioned China just now. China, we have a trade deficit close to 100 billion with China, right? We have a trade surplus with the US. So US is also our largest export market, and it's grown. It's grown by 25% last year, right? So US is important. And at the same time, engagement will be important to understand what are the concerns, if any.
Okay, so you mentioned engagement, and I understand you're set to lead a trade and investment mission to the US.
Yes.
When and what do you hope to achieve, especially with that trade surplus of 73 billion ringgit that could be a sticking point for the Trump administration? I suppose you're not there to check out your next posting as Malaysia's ambassador to the US, though.
No. I think I've denied that. Right. Yeah, okay. 73 billion may sound big, but it is actually very small relative to other countries and relative to the size of GDP of the US. But still, a surplus or deficit is still a point that we need to note, right? Yes, you're right, that there will be a trade and investment mission. We are targeting in May. In fact, we do it every year in May, so it's not something that's special, but at the same time, it's special because of the new administration and the new circumstances. So what we are going to do is I met up with the American-Malaysian Chambers last week, for example, and we're going to meet up with all the players, understanding what are their concerns. At the end of the day, we are government, we are facilitating as well. It's important that, those exports that are going to the US is all from the US companies based in Malaysia, right? Nearly all, majority, right? Substantial percentage of that is from US companies. So we need to engage them. What are their concerns? What can they do to ease the concerns of the US? Because at the end of the day, we are, I think in the future, it will be about security of the supply chain, one, but also the security of the technology, right? Technology security, because what they don't want to see, I think you've seen, for example, chips. They're saying that, I give you chips that are high end, and in this case, NVIDIA chips. Is it being smuggled?
Yeah.
Is it being used by companies that they don't want those companies to use, right? So these are, I think, more concerns that we need to get to address, right? So enforcement, it's like IP rights. People are worried about.
I mean, that's why there's this US export control framework, right, for AI diffusion, which we are going to be impacted. So if I bring that up, under our national semiconductor strategy, we're supposed to climb up the E&E value chain. But if we don't have access to these high-value AI chips, Tengku, what does this then mean for our grand plans?
Yes, okay. First of all, you must understand those chips are for the data centers. It's for the GPUs, right? It's slightly different from actual E&E sector, right? I mean, E sector is very broad. The chips are used for data centers, for the GPUs, for the usage of AI, etc. So I don't think there's so much a correlation there. But having said that, data center is important for our country because it allows our country to build on what we already built on our digital economy. And also, it's our competitive advantage given the strength of our utilities and our ecosystem. But back to your point, yes. So ASEAN, all countries, including Singapore, is in tier 2. Right? I mean, in tier 1, if you look at countries in Asia, it's only 3. If I'm not mistaken, it's Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Right? So we are all in the tier 2, meaning that restriction will limit our access to the most advanced chips. Of course, US companies based here, they are not as limited. So, it's more of those companies that are not US companies. So this becomes more important, more imperative that ASEAN nations work as a collective bloc. This is where we need to ensure supply chain resilience, supply chain security, supply chain competitiveness, while building our value proposition. So this is where I think it's important that we come out with one voice to explain what are your concerns. If your concerns is that you worry those chips are being used by parties or
Re-exported
companies
to China,
or re-exported.
recruited.
No, that one I think is I think you've seen what happened in Singapore. They've taken action against those people. But I think the other concern is also, companies coming here and using it, right? Not just exporting it. So that's, I think, we need to address those concerns and show and give some guarantees on enforcing those technology security.
Okay, so another thing I think is being pushed on, or at least Malaysia is focusing on, is our FTAs, right? Our free trade agreements.
Yes.
I suspect, or at least I know, it's definitely one way to mitigate these global trade disruptions.
Yeah.
How urgent is it? For example, like the Malaysian EU negotiations stalled since 2012.
2012.
Yes,
right.
but started again this year. Please don't say that it's going to take another 13 years for it to be signed eventually.
Yeah.
I mean, what are the points of contention?
Well, the points of contention into the year 2012 is one of these palm oil, of course, right? But now with CPTPP, with UK joining CPTPP, they've also accepted the terms and recognized the standards that we have. And I can say now to you that EU also have now recognized that. So the issues, the challenge, I think, will less than before.
When can we sign it? It's $1 trillion question.
Yeah, I know, because we can move very fast.
It's the EU that's slow.
But there are many countries in EU, just like if it's EU ASEAN, you understand, you just mentioned at the start of the show, there are 10 countries that you have
EU's
to...
27. So
Yeah, exactly. So it's not as straightforward as you think it is, but actually, ironically, they are moving faster than before. Also because they are concerned about the US, right? So they want to diversify their trade, and they've increased their frequency of their meetings with us, and I think they want to conclude early. And I've given a timeline to the team, so to make sure that a year from what we discussed, we should try and conclude it. And
by 2026.
Yes, that's what we told, and EU seems to be optimistic that they can do it as well.
Now, Tengku Zafrul, it won't be a breakfast grill unless we talk about politics. And politics is, I think, not for the faint-hearted. And ministers come and go, depending on the political powers of the day. But you have served under 3 different administrations. And we'll come to that in a minute. But as a current second-term minister, this term expires at the end of 2025. Don't you have to resign as MITI minister then, since a minister should either be a member of either House of Parliament?
Oh, Shani, I thought we were talking about ASEAN today.
We did. We talked about trade, we talked about investment, now politics.
Okay, Wong Xiaoning. Okay, so the answer is you're right. In Malaysian politics, if you want to serve as minister, if you are not a member of the lower house or Dewan Rakyat, in this case a member of Dewan Negara, you have only 2 terms, a maximum of 6 years, right? So I'm going to end that 6 years in end of the year, in fact in the mid of December. So I will have to step down as a minister. And after that, I have not thought about what I'm going to do next. But yes, the answer is yes. In December, that's when my term as minister ends.
But there is, of course, an option, right? If you do run for a seat. And is that...
That's not beyond my control.
Well, some would say yes. I mean, there are all these conversations that you're supposedly having to join PKR. And any truth to this, a simple yes or no will do.
Well, whatever it is, the decision, I think I owe it to my president, President of UMNO, who's also the Deputy Prime Minister.
Yes.
Because we are in one government today, unity government, Kerajaan Perpaduan. I think I owe it to him and to talk to him first before I announce on PFM.
Okay, but would you be open to the idea of joining PKR? Is it something that's totally not going to be considered? Because once upon a time, you did say on the show that you were loyal to the party.
Yeah. Oh, you remember?
I remember everything.
When was
That's
that?
about 1.5 years ago.
Well, honestly, to me, I think it's important for me to have that discussion with my president. He is someone that I do respect, and it is courtesy-wise, respectfully, I think I have to talk to him before I discuss with Wong Chao Ning.
Okay.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what is clear is that your relationship within UMNO, there are cracks appearing, right? After all, you did resign as Selangor UMNO treasurer way back in April. So that means to me, things are all not that rosy. Otherwise, there will be no resignation.
Wow. Your memory is very good.
I do a lot of research before these breakfast grills, Tengku Zafrul.
Yeah, I guess next time don't call it breakfast grill, call it breakfast torture. But anyway, yes, I must admit there are been challenges in
Yes.
UMNO, Selangor in particular, right? That's where I am from. I'm a Ketua Bahagian there and also a Supreme Council member, and I represent the state of Selangor when it comes to UMNO. I'm concerned, of course, looking at the work done in UMNO Selangor. But having said that, that's my view. People.
What's wrong with UMNO Selangor?
Well, I think there are things that we can do better. Let's put
Like?
it that way. Like, in my view, there are many. But I think it's important that again, I shouldn't talk about this in public. But what's important is there room for improvement, and I feel that I can contribute more towards that. But more importantly, I still feel that the party struggles, and the part that we are part of unity government is important, right?
Okay.
I'm just one man of many in UMNO. So, I think UMNO will continue its fight for the causes that have always been there. UMNO.
Can the party reclaim its former glory once again?
I think at the end of the day, parties goes through the phases, up and downs. We've seen parties in Japan, parties in India, all those ruling coalitions who's been in power and dominantly, playing dominant role in governments before. We'll always see the cycle, just like business, economy, etc. And so I feel that at the end of the day, it's about the people, right? If the people feel that UMNO or any parties for that matter are doing right, then yes. You've seen even the US, my concern is not so much the parties. My concern is that we need to ensure that Malaysia continues the middle ground. We've seen how parties on the right are winning in many countries in Europe, even in the US, right? So we as a multiracial country, we need to make sure that we continue being moderate in a lot of our approach and not be influence to move to the right or to the far right or to the far left. Right?
And do you think UMNO's at risk of that to win back the Malay vote in particular?
I don't. Well,
Because on the other end, we have PN, right, who have been preaching a different message completely.
This BFM, business FM.
Yes, but politics thrown in, of course.
Well, again, there's a lot of interpretations out there. So I don't want to accuse PN for moving to the far right to win votes, because all parties want to win votes, right?
Yes.
But I think common sense have to prevail, and I think all parties must think of the interests of our country and interests of our children, of our grandchildren. So the foundation of Malaysia is built on trust with all Malaysians, regardless of race and religion. So we need to build on the foundation that has made Malaysia what it is today.
Okay, Tengku Zafrul, we're in March.
March.
You're December. If either party, UMNO or PKR, were to offer you to contest in a parliamentary election, would you take it up? Is this something you're considering? Because then you wouldn't have to resign as MITI minister, would you? Are you going to choose the party that offers you that? Is that what's on the table?
No, I will not take up such offers. And to me, very honestly, people, rakyat, will not like to have by-elections just for someone. Someone like me at my level. Anyway, I'm not a very senior politician. I'm not someone very senior in any party. To make way, I think that will cost money for the government and time and resources as well. That's not very productive use of time and money. So to me, I rather contribute in other ways in the 1.5 years or 2 years when I'm not a minister, because you have to have a general election within 5 years. So
And so you will come back at that time.
I will not quit politics.
So you have, I would say then your conversion from technocrat to politician is complete then?
Yes, it is indeed complete. I want to serve. If I have the chance to serve, I want to serve.
Now, perhaps a cheeky question to throw in this conversation.
I thought the time's up.
No, we still have some time. You have served under 3 administrations. What are your reflections on this? Which was the best and then the worst?
Wow. Well, I don't want to answer that because I think all have their positives and negatives. But I must say, in terms of performance-wise, as a Minister of MITI, it has been very fulfilling. Of course, as Minister of Finance, then during the COVID-19, the challenges were different. And then after that, after the during the recovery period, again, second term as Minister of Finance, the challenges were different. And this year, in the last 2 years, I think is where, personally, I feel that our country is now ready for the, my Deputy Minister always like to say the second takeoff. Yeah.
Yes.
Have you read his book?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. So we are ready. I think we are built on the foundation that we have built over the years, and we've come back to the pre-crisis level, pre-COVID level. And I think the stability that's provided politically has given Malaysia a chance to move up the value chain.
Of course you will say that about your current boss. On that note, thank you for your time. On the Breakfast Grille this morning was Tengku Seri Zafrul Aziz, Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry. I'm Wong Shanik, BFM 89.9.